this is Mark Hutten, and welcome to today's show. This is all about autism spectrum disorders, specifically Aspergers and high-functioning autism. If you have a child on the spectrum, if you have a student, maybe you have a client, you're a therapist, maybe you're married to somebody who has Asperger's or high-functioning autism. Hopefully, there will be something here that will be of some benefit for you today. My email is mbhutton@gmail.com. We'll take your questions right now via email. Go ahead and float your questions to me now. I'm looking for them right now. Now, before we get started, I want to update you on some conferences that are coming up. These are the 2013 winter conferences on autism and Asperger's syndrome in Melville, New York. Melville, New York. You have Dr. Temple Grandin and Dr. Jed Baker coming to town on February 8th. Okay. Chicago on March 1st. You're going to have Dr. Temple Grandin and Dr. Melamed, I hope I pronounced that last name correctly, March 8th in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Temple Grandin and Jed Baker again coming to town. Let's see, Hot Springs, Arkansas. On March 15th, you're going to have Dr. Lucy Jane Miller and Paula Akia coming to town. March 28th, for those of you down in Dallas, Texas, March 28th, Dr. Temple Grandin and her mother coming to town. She's bringing her mom. You also have Lee Hirsch, and by the way, he was the director of the movie Bully, so he's going to have some interesting stuff to talk about. And lastly, if we want to launch way out there in April, we've got Knoxville, Tennessee, April 12th. In Knoxville, April 12th, Dr. Temple Grandin, her mother's coming with her again, and Dr. Jim Ball. So there you go. I would totally recommend you attend these conferences if they're in your area. If you're not sure how to sign up, just go to myaspergerschild.com. Again, go to myaspergerschild.com. You'll notice a search bar at the very top, and if you'll type in there 2013 winter conferences, that's your long keyword right there, 2013 winter conferences. A link will come up, and there'll be a place where you can sign up for these conferences. Okay, if you're sitting at your computer and you have any question about autism spectrum disorders, feel free to send that to me now, mbhutton@gmail.com. If I don't respond to your question through the course of the show, I'll respond to it after the show. So you'll either get a verbal response now, or I'll send you a return email and respond to you later, okay? We're going to take a short 30-second break, and we'll answer our first question. This is the Mark Hutten Show. Be right back. And we're going to jump right to the questions because we've got a bunch of them already here. We have one from Elizabeth in Austin, Texas. She's asking, what are some of the long-term outcomes for people with Asperger's? I'd like to know what to expect from my son when he becomes an adult. Well, honestly, Elizabeth, that's a very difficult question to answer because every child is different. If you've met one child with Asperger's, you've only met one child with Asperger's. They're significantly different, just like a typical child. Some of the main factors, though, I guess, would be his severity of symptoms, his baseline IQ, his ability to socialize, to fit in. Also, it also depends on the kind of interventions and support that he receives early. So, in a nutshell, the long-term outcomes are very good for people with Asperger's. They grow up, they go to college, or they go to techno school, they get married, a lot of them have families. I mean, remember that Asperger's is high-functioning autism. So we're not talking about autistic disorder. So let's just say that those who come from supportive families and those who retain a reasonable sense of self-esteem, and if they become relatively well-educated, and if they get some good social skills training when they're young, they stand just nothing short of an excellent chance of getting into solid relationships, finding good jobs, and just having a plain old normal life, okay? Okay, let's go to our next question. This is from Anonymous, and she's in the New York area. New York, New York. Oh, it's cold up there today. Let's see. It seems that there are more boys than girls with Asperger's. Is this true? If so, what accounts for the difference? Okay. Well, interestingly enough, different research studies list the ratio of males to females with Asperger's as being anywhere from 4 to 10 to 4 to 1. So that is, some research suggests that for every 4 males, there's 1 female with Asperger's. Other studies say that the male population is much higher. So there's a lot of conflicting research out there. Probably because the girls tend to fit in better. They kind of hide their symptoms better than boys do. Since there's no known specific cause of Asperger's, not that we've identified yet anyway, doctors don't really know why there seems to be such a diagnostic difference between boys and girls. But as the research comes in, we're speculating that we're guessing, really, that there's probably as many girls with Asperger's as there are boys. And as I stated earlier, I think the reason that more boys are getting diagnosed is because their symptoms are more profound, okay? There's a couple things that could account for the difference as far as more males being diagnosed than females. There might be a hereditary or a structural difference in boys that account for the difference. There's other disorders associated mostly with boys rather than girls. There could also be a difference in the way society and doctors diagnose Asperger's in boys versus girls. For example, the behavioral expectations between boys and girls are such that boys are less likely than girls to be diagnosed with shyness and could instead be diagnosed with Asperger's. So the symptoms of Asperger's aren't as readily diagnosable as some other disorders. So there's also a lot of mistakes in diagnosis. So suffice it to say that there's much more research that needs to be done to not only look for the causes of Asperger's, but to search out those subtle cues that are not quite as obvious. You know, if you see a child in a full-blown meltdown, that's an obvious cue. But if you see a girl who seems to be shy, that could just be shyness, or it could be an indication of Asperger's. So a lot of work needs to be done in the area of diagnosing autism spectrum disorders in general. Good question. Thank you. Okay, next question's from Richard. He's in Las Vegas, and he asks, are there certain things that I should tell my Asperger's son's new teacher before he starts summer school next summer in order to help the teacher make any necessary adjustments or accommodations? Yes, there are. By the time your child reaches the age where he's going to school, you as the parent will have had several years to experience, exactly what works, what doesn't work. You're going to be able to figure out what he's sensitive to, what causes his sensory sensitivities, what launches him into a meltdown if he has meltdowns, which he probably does. So while your son's teacher understands the fundamentals of teaching, no doubt, he or she will probably be lacking in critical information about Asperger's and what works best in certain circumstances. And this means that you have information to share with this teacher, and the time to do that is, now, before your child starts summer school with his new teacher. So I'm glad you're asking this question in February instead of June. You will want to share information on your child's diagnosis and his normal level of functioning. If your son has a normal or above normal IQ, you want to tell the teacher that your child has that cognitive ability to succeed under the right circumstances. You'll want to talk about visual learning and the fact that children with Asperger's and high-functioning autism tend to learn best through pictures, and they're less likely to learn through auditory awareness or through letters and words. You'll also want to talk to this teacher about those things that set your son off. In other words, any types of obsessions, compulsive behavior, sensory sensitivities, and so on. If your son still has temper tantrums, you want to talk about how to manage those and how to avoid them. If he has meltdowns, you want to be sure to talk about that. So tell the teacher that you can be available as a resource if needed. Assuming that you can do that. Not all parents are going to be able to be on call during the time that the child's at school. But if you are, give her your cell phone number and let her know that or him know that they can call you whenever they need to. So try to have a phone number that you can be reached at for any impromptu issues. Also, make a deal with the teacher that allows you to attend class on the first few days of summer school or when things get difficult. This will help, not only help your son adjust to school, but it'll aid the teacher in the process of getting to know your son and how to deal with certain Asperger's symptoms, okay? So you want to maintain that teacher-parent alliance right from the beginning and all throughout summer school in order to have the best chance that your son is going to be able to not only learn but thrive within the structure of this, I'm assuming it's a mainstream classroom because you didn't mention that it was special ed or a private school. So, okay, great question. Thank you. We're going to take a quick 30-second break and we'll be right back with the next question. This is Mark Hutten, and before I take the next question, I briefly want to talk about the gift of Asperger's. I've worked with a lot of parents over the years, and some of them have, when they find out that their child has Asperger's or high-functioning autism, some of them have a multitude of, well, let's just call it negative emotions. They're overly concerned that their child has a disability or a disease because perhaps they don't know that much about autism spectrum disorder, so they have a lot of myths that they play in their head. So one of the first things I try to do is expose the myths so that the parents can realize that you actually have a child that's got a bunch of strengths, way more strengths than weaknesses, way more abilities than inabilities. But some of these parents, and I'm certainly not trashing the parent because, if this is what they feel, this is what they feel. But some of them have a sense of disappointment, at least initially. Maybe not in a major way, but some of their thoughts are, this is not the child that I had hoped to have. This is not the child that I expected to have. And they're not so much disappointed in the child himself or herself, but they're more disappointed in the situation. But let me tell you something. Kids with Asperger's and their families spend a great deal of time focused on the needs or the limitations of the Asperger's child. But these kids have a lot of abilities that the typical children don't have. So you're not in a one-down position. You're just in a different position and sometimes in a one-up position relative to other families. So it's important that families talk about the strengths and abilities of their Asperger's child. For example, a lot of these kids are very creative. Some of them are just almost like a natural genius. Now, true, they are limited in their interests, but the few interests that they have, they tend to be very knowledgeable in that area. Most of them are above average intelligence. They can see the world very differently compared to the average person. Their overriding priority is usually to solve a problem rather than to satisfy the social or emotional needs of other people. They're also very well known for being direct. In other words, they speak their mind and they're honest and determined. These kids can give considerable attention to detail. A lot of them have a great sense of humor. They have a real strong sense of social justice, and usually they're very creative, and they're more concerned about creativity than cooperation. That could be a plus or a minus depending on how you look at it. But it's important to celebrate Asperger's children for what and who they are, recognizing their individual strengths and abilities, because they have a ton of them. So doing this on a daily basis is going to not only help your child build self-esteem and self-confidence, but it's also going to help you to be able to erase any type of misconceptions or shame or guilt or whatever you might be feeling if you're having some negative emotions once you find out that your child has Asperger's. So find those strengths, talk about them, okay? Again, it's important for families to talk regularly in front of the child about his strengths and abilities. And you will be surprised just how far this child will go if you'll frame things from a positive perspective and forget about the negative stuff, okay? Let's go to our next question here. Okay, here's a question from Catherine. She's from the Indianapolis area. She's asking, is it common for a child with Asperger's to quickly and easily get upset about little things throughout the day? The least little thing will set my child off. Common, I don't know that I would necessarily say it's common, but there are a lot of children with Asperger's and high-functioning autism that do have what I call low frustration tolerance. And if you want several articles on that, just go to myaspergerschild.com. In the search bar up top, type in low frustration tolerance, and you'll get numerous articles about that. But to address that situation now, the kids with Asperger's, they suffer from different types of stress compared to other kids. And these stressors can be as diverse as school issues, texture of clothing, picky eating, and these types of things. So these kids do suffer from a lot of obsessive thoughts that they're stressed out by. And it could be anything from, noisy environment to certain smells, certain textures. Things are out of place. If they're organized and something has been moved, that can stress them out and so on. So these children might be quite intolerant of others as well as the environment. They become very anxious in unstructured settings. They become very anxious in situations where people are moving around at random. They may not be able to tolerate people standing close to them. And at the very least, the child may be distracted and unable to concentrate. So every child will have his issue that stresses him out. But if you've met one child with Asperger's, you've only met one child with Asperger's. So what may stress this child out may actually be something that the next child enjoys. So when they're younger, this kind of stress can lead to a temper tantrum. It can also lead to a meltdown, and sometimes parents have difficulty knowing which is which. Older Asperger's kids can have angry outbursts or other evidence of stress when things aren't going their way. They may start cussing. They may act out. They may throw stuff. They may become violent, hitting themselves or hitting others or hitting the wall. And all of that is inappropriate. But again, a lot of times I have found out that when the child is acting this way, it's not so much that he's being defiant. It's just it's the only way he knows how to cope with his sensory difficulties. Sometimes parents and even siblings just need to give in to the idiosyncrasies of the Asperger's child. They may need to keep the noise down or keep things in a specific order. They may have to respect their child's need for certain clothing textures and so on. Another thing that contributes to a child having low frustration tolerance is lack of sleep. Lack of sleep leads to stress, and sleep disorders are very common in Asperger's children. Taking naps during the day may help. Using melatonin before bed may help with this. Some stress reduction techniques can be taught. For example, he may need to remove himself physically from whatever situation is causing his anxiety. Another thing you can do is to make his environment free from distractions, but also he has rules that he has to follow rigidly, and this can do a lot to help the Asperger's child concentrate. Sometimes if you have your child carry around a favorite object, that gives him a sense of security and keeps him calm. The nature of the object may seem quite bizarre to you. It could be a cat's eye marble from the road or a rock that he found somewhere or a AAA battery or something that's kind of odd. But if it helps him calm down, let him carry it with him. I had a client one time. He was about 12 years old, and he always had pockets full of AAA batteries. And his parents were so irritated with that and were trying to get the child to stop carrying these around. But as I explained to the parents, if it helps him calm down, then by all means, let him have as many batteries in his pocket as he wants. And when he got stressed out, he'd reach in, grab a few of the AAA batteries, and just rub them in the palm of his hand, and it helped him calm down. Other kids derive comfort from repeating a set ritual of some kind. The ritual can be very long and complex, but if it's a ritual that helps your child calm down, then let him have his ritual. Don't try to stop him from engaging in that. So the ritual, however time-consuming, it's going to have to be carried out at home and in classroom situations, and also the comfort object he needs to be allowed to have that at all times. You'll have to work with the teachers on that, because the teachers may not understand why he has a pocket full of AAA batteries, for example. and she may want to disallow that, but you can convey to the teacher that this helps him calm down. So your child will probably find some ways to deal with his low frustration tolerance, and they may be rather odd coping mechanisms, but if it works for him, then let him do it. A lot of times, parents perceive misbehavior when what's really going on is the child is just using a coping mechanism that is either rather odd or has the appearance of defiance. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Is it common for a child with Asperger's to quickly and easily get upset about little things throughout the day? Again, I don't know that it's necessarily common, but it certainly does happen with some of these children. Take a short break and we'll be right back. Show. This is Mark Hutten, and we're talking about autism spectrum disorders. Before we go on to the next question, I wanted to briefly let you know some resources that are available for you. If you go to myaspergerschild.com, I have a bi-weekly newsletter, and what I mean by that is not every 2 weeks, but twice a week. You get a free newsletter, and I'm going to basically talk about parenting skills for the child with Asperger's and high-functioning autism. You can sign up for that on myaspergerschild.com. I also have a support group for you. When you go to myaspergerschild.com, if you look over on the right side, you will see a link that says Parenting Asperger's Children Support Group, and that is also free. Feel free to join that support group, and there's a lot of questions that come up and a lot of answers and a lot of support and advice from other parents. That's usually the best advice. And when you're hearing somebody who has been raising a child with Asperger's or high-functioning autism, and they've been there and done that, and they've learned the hard way about how to deal with this special needs child, and so they have a lot of good advice to share with you if you're new to this whole business of having a child on the spectrum. If you have a teenager with Asperger's or high functioning autism, we have a support group for them. In a way, it's more like a chat room really, and that is AspergersTeenChat.com, and that chat room is monitored, so it's a fairly safe place to be. Also, we have a support group for those of you with Asperger's or high-functioning autism who are young adults or even older adults, and that is going to be AdultAspergersChat.com. Go to AdultAspergersChat.com, and that is specifically a chat room and a support group for adults with high-functioning autism and Asperger's. Also, if you've heard about the benefit of using social stories to teach social skills and emotion management to kids on the spectrum, then you'll want to go to AspergersSocialStories.com. AspergersSocialStories.com, and you can learn how to write a social story if you don't know how to. You'll learn about the benefits of using social stories, and if you need a particular social story about a particular problem behavior or a particular challenging situation that you're having with your child, there's a link on that site, and we'll create one for you. Okay, if you're not sure exactly how to create a good social story given a particular issue or problem, we have a link over there that you can click on and tell us what issue you need addressed, and we'll create a social story for you. Okay? Also, for those of you who are looking for a support group in your local area, and I don't mean an online support group, I mean an offline support group, then we have another resource for you. If you'll go to myaspergerschild.com, and over on the right, you'll see a little link that says Asperger's Support Groups. And we've got just a ton of support groups from all around the world, and hopefully you'll find one near you. And the last thing I want to talk about is I have a series of instructional videos that I would like to send you. If you'll email me, and my email address is mbhutton@gmail.com, then I'll send you a series of instructional videos, and we talk about a lot of things on there. There's going to be tips for teachers. If you're a teacher and you have some children on the spectrum, if you have a defined Asperger's teenager, if you want to know what a meltdown is and how that contrasts with a temper tantrum and what to do about both, then send me an email. I'll email you back, and I'll give you a link to all these videos, and you can go through them. Take as long as you need to get through all of them. There's tips on there about how to stop the bullies at school if your child has been bullied, how to reduce your stress as the parent of a child on the spectrum, and so on. So those are all free resources for you, and feel free to take advantage of them. Okay, let's jump on to our next question. We have a question from Jane, and she's from the UK, and she's asking, what's the difference between Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism? Well, the short answer is very little, if any, and in the DSM-5, which comes out in May of this year, I believe, Asperger's is going to be referred to as high-functioning autism. So, according to the DSM-5, when it comes out, there's going to be no distinction between the two, and we're not even going to be calling it Asperger's anymore. But anyway, until that time, Asperger's and high-functioning autism are currently considered separate diagnoses along the spectrum of autistic disorders. Even so, there are many similarities between the disorders so that some consider them to be different labels for the same condition. Both those with Asperger's and high-functioning autism have difficulties with sensory functioning, and they can't tolerate certain noises or certain kinds of tactile stimuli and so on. By definition, those with either disorder have an IQ which is at, near, or above the normal intelligence range. Both conditions involve a child or adult who has learned to function in society by relying on the skills they happen to be good at. Children with Asperger's and high-functioning autism think better in visual terms. They see pictures in their heads when recalling something and don't have a particular good ability to think in words. Both diagnoses are associated with a relative inability to understand nonverbal cues and facial expressions. The primary difference noted in the diagnostic criteria for each disorder is in the finding of a greater speech delay in children with high-functioning autism when compared to children with Asperger's. Others feel this represents a continuum and that this shouldn't be enough to establish one diagnosis over another. Some children with tentative high-functioning autism will catch up on verbal skills and will carry the same diagnostic appearance that Asperger's children do. Their IQ may be at least as high as other children labeled with Asperger's. So children with Asperger's and high-functioning autism are both high-functioning, and in general, they can all read, write, speak, and understand. In the end, though, the final subtleties between the two diagnoses may just be a matter of semantics and may not really represent a true difference in diagnoses. Okay, we have a question from an individual here that wants to remain anonymous, and this individual is asking, I've been thinking about homeschooling my 6-year-old Asperger's child. Are there any critical issues I should examine before making this move? I'm undecided at this point and want to make the right decision. Well, I would say that homeschooling is an option for many Asperger's children, and it could be the best educational choice for some. It's been my experience that kids on the spectrum, for the most part, do very, very, very well, either in an alternative school setting or a homeschooling situation. Conversely, it's also been my experience that most Asperger's children really struggle in regular school, mostly because there's just too many people, too much movement, too much noise, too much sensory stimulation in general. The first decision to make is whether or not the family has the resources of time necessary to homeschool the Asperger's student. Special learning techniques may need to be learned, and parents who homeschool need lots of patience and an understanding of the specific teaching strategies that are needed for kids on the spectrum. You said that he was 6 years old, so I'm assuming that he has not started school yet. And if that is the case, it may be interesting to try your child out at a public or private school situation before deciding on homeschooling, because he may be one of those that does very fine in a public school setting. Some Asperger's children fit fairly well into the classroom, while others are quickly labeled freaks or geeks or whatever, and then they're shunned by their classmates. Teachers of regular classrooms may not have the time or energy to deal with the intricacies of teaching an Asperger's student, and by observing what's happening in the classroom, you may find that homeschooling is one of the few viable options. Now, some challenges of homeschooling include dealing with a child that is a visual learner who might not learn as well by listening. Some Asperger's children become so obsessed about having everything perfect that they'll throw away papers that they've made mistakes on. And these children often have a very narrow focus of interest, so that the parent-teacher, and that would be you would be the parent-teacher, needs to find ways to tie in other subjects or to teach other subjects in a way that is interesting to your child. And there are always critics who are going to argue that homeschooled children lack the necessary social skills that children who go to regular school get on a daily basis. But with Asperger's children, social skills must often be taught in a structured setting. And parents have the opportunity to do this and to explore putting their child on a sports team or other social organization, like band or a music program, which gives them, the social skills without overwhelming them. So in general, a parent who teaches the innate interests of their child will not only be successful, but will have succeeded in giving their child a better education than they would get in a noisy, chaotic public school system. Okay? Great question. Thank you. This is not lasting long enough for me. We're out of time already? Oh, okay. We got to quit. Got the word from the boss lady. So we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for your questions. And this is Mark Hutten with The Mark Hutten Show, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.